we never had it so good as a human species. We are very lucky indeed to be living at this particular moment. And yet, paradoxically, the symptoms of unwellness are rising all around the world. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. But before doing so, I will offer an hypothesis to you about why it is so. Why is it that symptoms of unwellness are rising around the world? Probably, I say probably because this is not yet grounded in robust academic research, but it's an hypothesis. Probably this has to do with fairness. Fairness is our most important psychological trait. We all care about fairness up to a point where we are ready to abandon economic well-being or monetary incentives in favor of fairness. And it's documented through many different games played in economics. One of them is called the Ultimatum Game, and I don't have time to elaborate, but if you look at it, you will realize that fairness is a sentiment that matters the most in the way we make decisions. And it's probably something that is embedded in our DNA. There are genetic determinants to fairness, and I'm going to show you why with this small video, which we can play now. It's about monkeys and fairness.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
Okay, I think we can stop here. The point is made. I'm showing this to you because it suggests that there are genetic determinants to fairness. It's something that is embedded in animal species as well as in our humanness, and we do care a lot about fairness. I'm mentioning it to you because when we look, the best proxy, economic proxy of fairness is equality, and as we all know, inequalities are rising in today's world. And inequalities create a profound sentiment of unfairness, and probably this has a lot to do with the rise of populism. You know, populism is rising around the world. You see it with Trump in the US, you see it with Brexit, you see it with the ascendancy of strongmen, Duterte in the Philippines, Erdogan in Turkey, Putin in Russia, and so on and so forth. And you know, over the past 2 days, we've been mentioning often that we are a very privileged group. We all swim in wellness, we love it. We are all dedicated to the cause of wellness, but we're a very, very small sample, an extremely small sample. We belong to the elite. You know, today you define the elite as people who combine an education degree and a regular source of income, and that's 3% of the world population, not very much. So for all those who do not belong to the elite, there is an amplifying, rising sentiment of unfairness that is, I would suggest, having a determining impact on symptoms of unwellness. I'm going to start with a big macro picture. And in the simplest possible terms, I would suggest that the macroeconomic outlook is characterized by a very high level of unwellness. According to the BIS, which is the bank of central banks, based in Basel, next door, we are all victims around the world of what they call the risky trinity, of unusually low productivity rates. It's very paradoxical because we keep talking about the fantastic pace of technological innovation, and yet the level of productivity around the world are either flattening or declining, like in the United States. And we heard from Jan a bit earlier this morning how productivity levels are correlated with well-being and wellness. Second important element to take into consideration is the very high level of indebtedness in the global economy. Without bothering you with the data, we are today much more indebted collectively than we were 7 years ago or 8 years ago when the great financial crisis started. And the third point is that there is a very, very narrow room for policy maneuver. At the moment, the whole game is played by central banks. Monetary policy is the name of the game. And the very low interest rates, unusual policies put into place over the past few years, quantitative easing, NIRP, negative interest rate policies, are having a very strong distortionary effect on the market, on how we price financial instruments. So they've worked in the sense that they allowed to avert economic depression, but now the utility is declining, and it's creating all sort of negative side effects, meaning that we are not very far from a major shock susceptible to affect the whole economic outlook, the global economic outlook. Another point which I would like to make is that at the moment we have very low interest rates, if not negative interest rates, like in Switzerland and Austria. And of course, very low interest rates are conducive to investment. You know, it's great to invest when you benefit from a very low cost of capital, particularly when you are in an industry like wellness that is booming. But it's important to remember that there is a psychological dimension attached to very low interest rates, and it's fundamentally a symptom of apprehension about the future. Interest rates are low because we are not confident about what the global outlook is going to be, either economically, geopolitically, in societal terms, etc. And interest rates are low for many reasons, but the primary reason being that consumers don't consume and businesses don't invest at the moment. In the US, for example, large companies are sitting on more than 3 trillion in cash. Now, when we narrow it down to the economic cost of unwellness, we realize that in today's world, in our hyper-connected societies, in which the rhythm of time is accelerating constantly, we are in always-on societies working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is exerting an incredible toll on wellness. And you can measure it according to different indicators. I've chosen just a few. But you have today an epidemic in terms of obesity. Obesity, since 1975, has risen by 175%. And today, there are 13 million people in the world who are obese. Loneliness, paradoxically, there is a book called Being Alone Together. In a society where we tend to make many friends online and in a digital fashion, there is a rising epidemic of loneliness, particularly in the societies that are very consumer-oriented, such as the US or the UK. And this is, of course, also exerting a toll on wellness because it costs a lot of money. People who are lonely tend to die earlier, tend to have a higher incidence of mental illnesses, and so on and so forth. Mental illness, we've heard this morning how critical an issue this is. Just in the UK, to give you an example, the cost of mental illnesses is estimated to be by the NHS, the National Health Service, at £90 billion per year. And critically, in the UK, there has been a study just published by the NHS and whose results are published also in The Lancet, showing that the rate of mental illness for young women between the age of 16 and 25 has trebled over the past 6 years. Nobody knows exactly why this is, but it's probably associated with the high level of consumption of social media. The more time you spend on social media, the higher the incidence in terms of mental illness and other phenomena such as cyberbullying, for example, particularly for young ladies and girls. So all of these have an economic cost which tends to be very high, and I could go on and on and on. Many of these are documented in the wellness edition of the Monthly Barometer, but for example, something that was not very much talked about until 2 years ago, air pollution. Air pollution, there has been a study just published by the World Bank estimating that the global cost of air pollution worldwide is $5.1 trillion in terms of welfare losses and $230 billion in terms of lost income. So these are very important figures showing that the cost of unwellness is rising at a time when the pressure being imposed upon the healthcare systems is rising dramatically. And it is so for 3 reasons, which are listed in the slide. First of all, aging populations. Demographics explains 2/3 of everything, demographers like to say, and it's very true. And the whole world is aging. It's not only Japan, Russia, Europe, the whole world is aging with different degrees, but some countries are aging very, very fast, like Iran, for example, dramatically fast, and this is imposing a very heavy cost in terms of healthcare systems. Funding constraints that have to do with what I mentioned earlier, the high degree of indebtedness and the fact that GDP is not growing fast enough, and of course the rising level of chronic diseases to which I just alluded. So, the conclusion is very obvious. As Irini said this morning, wellness has to become mandatory. It's not a choice anymore. It's an obligatory option. And whether you look at it from the private sector's perspective, from the business perspective, or from the public perspective, the perspective of policymakers, many things are going to be put into place in order to ensure that wellness becomes compulsory or mandatory, or at least the trend is very clearly in that direction. In the private sector, we've heard so many times over the past 2.5 days that workplace wellness programs are gaining increasing relevance and becoming a strategic imperative for many companies worldwide. Strategic imperative is something that was mentioned by McKinsey in a report on workplace wellness just a few months ago. And in the public sector, there are many policies aimed at taxing practices that make you unwell. The best known example, of course, is the obesity tax, which is now being imposed in an increasing number of countries. And when countries don't move fast enough, the local authorities, the region, the city, are putting into place policies destined to tax unwellness. You see it in Philadelphia, you see it in Mexico City, in Paris, in Beijing, in many places around the world. What is, so the direction is very, the trend is very clear. And it is important to realize that it's not going to be a linear phenomenon. It's not going to be a slow rising trend. Because it's becoming so critically important for companies and governments alike to restrain the cost of unwellness, there'll be a snowball effect. And most likely, these trends will evolve at a geometric rate, so very, very fast. And there'll be a snowball effect, creating ultimately a positive avalanche. Oh, I see it's already the end. No, I'm going to conclude very, very, very rapidly. It's very hard, of course, to tell who are the winners and who are the losers. You as a group are the winners because there are so many tailwinds supporting the growth of the wellness industry. Being a winner as a group doesn't mean that you are going to be the winner at an individual level, because money is made at the margin, and it's not always easy to succeed in an industry, even if the industry is rising at a very fast rate. However, if we try to look at the aggregate cost and benefits of this trend, all the wellness-related themes are going to be supported and benefiting from strong tailwinds. Travel and tourism in particular. Travel and tourism and wellness grow at a much higher rate than GDP, trend GDP, about 4, 5, 6%, depending on the countries, per year. Organic, high-quality food companies. Of course, this is again, to go back to the 1%. It's a minuscule. Organic food is a minuscule portion of aggregate food production worldwide, but it is growing at an extremely fast pace. Today is less than 0.5% of global food production, but growing at 40% in some countries like China. So phenomenal. The losers, well, obvious. All the companies that pollute. It's not a good time to be in the mining industry or to be in the oil and gas industry. The large food and beverage companies, when you read the annual reports of Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Pepsi, it's totally obvious that these companies are fully aware that the time when consumers will have to stop consuming the products is coming, and they're trying to adjust, particularly through a very ambitious program of M&A, but it's hard. I would just conclude by suggesting that in the end, chance favors the prepared mind. So when you know about the trend, it's much more easy to position yourself in an advantageous manner. Thank you very much.